So here we have more people showing up. So here we have Deborah Morton. She's going to talk to us about the differences between developmental editing, structural editing, and revision editing. And I'm so thrilled you're here, Deborah. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself before you get started?
Sure. I started writing children's books, getting on about 15 years ago, maybe a little more than 15 years ago. And in 2017, I decided that I had a book that I'd been kind of nickel and diming together for about 35 years. And I just decided that's it, I'm going to write it. And I wrote that book, and it launched me into learning everything there is to know about story theory, um, everything that I could possibly put together. And now, since then, I have that book. I have 2/3 of a trilogy. I'm working on the last book of the trilogy. I'm a certified story coach and structural editor, which includes developmental editing as well. So that's what I want to talk about tonight. And I do want to clarify the difference between revision and editing. So editing are all the suggestions that the editor, or even yourself as the writer, decide what needs to change, but yet hasn't changed. And then the revision is actually making that change. And that's the part that only the writer, the author will do. The editor will not do that. So the only time there's actually a revisional edit is when you're working with yourself and you're just doing it with yourself at the same time, kind of thing. And so I just wanted to clarify that so that as I'm speaking, everybody's on that page. They may have different versions. Unfortunately, in this industry, there are so many versions of saying the same thing, but with all different words, that I just want to make sure for tonight's discussion that edits are from editors and revisions are from are the changes that you've suggested and now are being made by the writer themselves. When I do an edit for someone, the first thing that I do structural edits. And when I get started, the first thing that I do is developmental work before I even start the edit. So I do an advanced beta. I read the book. I find all the places. The first thing I find are all the places where the writer has nailed it. They've gotten it just perfect, because I feel that people learn the most from that. And then I go from there and find the places where they didn't quite catch it. They missed the mark a little bit. And I mark those places up. Then I get back to the author and talk with them about those. We go through one at a time. Some things will be something small and can just kind of get included into the structural edit, but sometimes there's big changes. So for instance, in a developmental edit, you're looking at developing characters, looking for big plot holes, or making sure your plot is strong. You're looking for really wonderful settings. So everything is three-dimensional. You're looking for imagery, and you're looking for that really full picture. And that's what the developmental part of it is. And then this ensures that your characters are inflated and with clear and well-defined plot and a full stage. So we've got everything that we need for the story. Now, at that point, once that's all sorted out, the structural edit comes in. And what the structural edit does is it makes sure that the parts to the story are in their proper order. And so they help the author arrange their story for clarity and for strength. And this exposes the author's voice and also their intent. And so in turn, for the reader, they get the biggest impact out of what they're reading. So when I do this as one kind of big swoop and do all of it at once. I also will help the author with their revision, so that if they need clarity, or maybe need ideas or whatever, that I'll help them get through that revision process so that they get the most out of it. The thing about when you write, it doesn't always come out as intended. I mean, we've all said something that as it came out of our mouth and we could hear it, we knew that that wasn't actually, it didn't come out like we wanted it to. And so the developmental edit and the structural edit helps to sort that out so that what you really wanted to put on that page is really what is on that page. So that when the reader's reading it, you don't need to be sitting on their shoulder going, well, what I really meant was this, even though it says this. And so those are the kind of things that I work with. Did you, I wasn't abundantly sure how you wanted to do that. Do you have questions for me?
I have a question already, and of course we
Yeah.
can open it up for questions. So I do understand the developmental edit, and I do understand why that needs to come first. So
Yeah.
if I have this right, and I actually have 2 or 3 questions. So if I have this right, a person should go through a developmental edit first, and from the suggestions there, go back and make revisions. And then they come back and do a structural edit to make sure that everything is supposed to be included is included, and it's included in the right place. And when you say in the right place or in the right order, I presume that means it as you are bleeding backstory into the story. It's not all at the front, so that now we know what is, Jane Eyre, beautiful book. The first 100 pages I could do without, because it was all backstory. And of course, that's exactly how they wrote 200 years ago, but it doesn't work today. So when you're talking about putting things in order, we don't necessarily mean chronological order, correct?
That's correct. It's how it fits with the story. So sometimes there's a flashback, then you're going backwards. But it's how each piece falls into place in the story in its proper place. So it doesn't, like you said, it doesn't necessarily mean it's in chronological order, but it's in the order of the story as the story's being told.
Okay, so the reveals are coming where they should come, not too soon, not too late, that kind of stuff. And when it comes to structure now, of course, there are various different structures for different genres. I personally work on a 3-act structure, but not everybody in romance works on a 3-act structure. How do you determine what structure is right for a particular novel?
So for me, mostly I work with a 3-act structure. However, if somebody doesn't, the story as a whole will still be told as a whole. And so I'm working with the story as a whole. And so whether it's a 3-act structure or not, I've actually, Daniel David Wallace, he's starting to work with a 2-act structure now. Mentioned, and I thought, well, okay, but at any rate, it still is the story. And so for me, it's more about each, so we still have our plot points, we still have our key scenes. We still have each individual scene, and we still have, of course, towards the end, that's when I start working on dividing up with chapters, themes and chapters and that type of thing. And so whether they're in a 3-act story, a 5-act story, a 7-act story, it really doesn't matter, because as I go along with each particular scene, those pieces will all come together as they should.
Okay, that's great. Do you want to take questions, or do you want to talk a little bit more? How do you want to work this? We're open.
Okay.
We
Well, the
don't.
one thing I did want to say is that whenever you're writing a story, it has to have three, as far as I'm concerned, it has to have three main elements. It needs the bones, which is all the key elements to the story. It needs a beginning, a middle, and end. It needs to have all the key scenes in it. You need to have a story goal. You need all of those things. Those are the bones. But it also needs a breath, and that is, for this particular instance, if it's a single protagonist, they need their clear path through their story goal that they're going to be on. And that breath will be their ups and downs as they go through. Sometimes they get a lot of ups, they're taking a nice deep breath, but sometimes they're letting out a big old sigh. And so you want to make sure that you have this sort of steady breath that's going through the story. And the last thing is that you want a rhythm, you want a beat that goes through your story, which is scenes, individual scenes that are complete and steady, and they move you from one scene to the next, that you have proper chapter breaks in the places so that you have what can look like a heartbeat. And if you've got bones, a breath, and a beat, you've got a living, breathing story that's your goal through this whole thing, is to make sure that you have all of that. And when you work through the development section and then the structural section, the last couple of things that you'll have to do that I don't do is line edits and copy edits and that kind of thing. But if you have all of this in place, when you go to do that part is usually pretty well sorted by the time you get there. And so it's important to do this big stuff first. This is the really big high level stuff that has to happen to your story first. And so given that, I'd really kind of like to let this open up to questions for the folks that are listening.
Anyone who wants to ask a question, you can unmute yourself and ask the question, just so that you know anyone who is talking will be on the screen. So if you want to ask a question and you don't want your face on the video, you'll need to turn off your camera. So let me see, we've got something in the chat. Okay, somebody wanted to know if we were going to have a replay. I expect to have a replay up this weekend, and I will send out an email saying what that is. What do you find the most challenging aspect of editing?
In structural editing or the developmental part? What in particular are you looking at?
And Linda, you're going to have to explain that because I don't know.
Well, I do happen to know that Deborah is a brilliant editor, but I was just wondering, to give everybody else some insight into how brilliant she is, that she could kind of go through like what her model is for how she works on edits, because I think it's actually pretty effective from just how she approaches working with people who need edits. So that's what I would encourage you to share that, because I have found it to be really interactive. And so anyway, I'll say no more. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, if you hire me as an editor, the first thing, as I mentioned earlier, that I do is I read your book, I do a beta read on it, and I find some of those big issues. Then I go through and I mark it up for, basically it's for intent. And Well, we could, if you don't mind, Linda, we could chat a little bit about ours that we're working on, with yours. But Linda has a story that's a romance. She has a character that has been emotionally harmed in her early years and even in her older years, and so she's wanting to uh, create a growth arc for her. And what I found when I started reading her book is that she kind of got stuck in this one way that she had her character, that she was very snarky and she was snippy and that kind of thing. And no matter what her love interest was doing, she wasn't really getting past that. So we started just very small little bits. So when I talk about these big changes, they actually can be very small changes. In 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 one particular instance that I'm thinking about, he had said something very nice to her, and her response was very sarcastic. And I said, you might want to soften this just as a start towards where you want her to go. And so rather than say something like, some kind of an insult, we changed it so that she said something more like, wow, I never really expected you to say that. Now she's still a little on the Starkey side, but she's given him a benefit of the doubt for the first time. And so we kind of just work through those little bits at a time. And what I do with my clients is that I work with them through the process. You don't hand me your manuscript and then months later get it back and it's all marked up and you have no idea what was going on in my mind when that happened. I include you through the process so that, number one, you can tell me, hey, that's not where I want to go. Or you can, say, wow, that's great. So if that happens, then we could change this other part. And we find ourselves sort of working in concert with how that story is going to change throughout the whole process. And so one of the things that I do is I offer a coaching amount of money that can be somewhere, it generally is falling between $300 and $700. But if you work with me and then I do your edit, I take that money and put it towards the edit price. And your edit price, what may have been, say, 5 or 6 cents a word, has now come down to maybe 4 cents a word minus the money that you've already given me. So it can really benefit you by working that way with me and keeping those costs down. The other thing that can happen with another client that I'm working with, we eliminated one solid chapter that was quite a long chapter, and he was worried that it was going to hurt his word count. But I had him growing his character development and 2 more storylines for these 2 extra characters that were already in the book, but not quite enough. And so we created this whole nother storyline for these 2 other characters. And he came out with 300 words difference when it was over, even though he took all of that out. So he was thrilled that worked that way. Had he not done that, then, you may find yourself pulling things out that you don't have to now pay for to have me edit it, saying you need to cut this out, it needs to go, type of thing. So I love to be very interactive with my clients, and from the very beginning all the way to the end. I don't want to let them go until they're fully feeling like, they're happy with the product when they're finished.
Okay,
Can I
question. Oh,
can I interject something really quick?
go ahead.
For me personally, my story I wrote about 5 years ago. So this is before I even bought my first craft book. I just spit this story out. And then the more I learned, buying craft books and attending conferences and all that, I realized, ooh, this needs some work. And I got myself convinced that it was lousy. And I was just scared to death to share it with anybody. And I knew it needed an edit, but I was still afraid of getting feedback. And so, first of all, yes, to sing Deborah's praises, she kind of helped me get past that. Whoever is considering getting an edit, make sure that you have that opportunity to, interview them, have a call with them to make sure that you're compatible. Because not everybody's
Yes.
going to be not going to be compatible. They're not going to understand your vision for your story. So it's really
Yes.
critical to have somebody like that. And also, I just really like the fact that, like what Deborah and I do, we try to include the writer from the very beginning of the process, so that if there's something like I get into the book a quarter of the way and the inciting incident, the first plot point is either late or it's off or it's doing something completely wacky that I don't understand, instead of letting me go through the whole rest of the book before I get back to the writer, I can say, hey, let's talk about what you had planned here and whether how that fits in with the rest of your story. So you just want to have somebody that's going to be really interactive with you. And Deborah's just really excellent about that. And she's kind of inspired me to do things the same way. But that's all I wanted to say.
Very, very good point. Multiple very good points. Deborah, I want to ask you, you had mentioned, okay, so you do the coaching, you do the developmental edit, you do the structural edit. Everything's like, okay, now we're ready to go. And then you said, but you don't do the line, you don't do the line edits, you don't do the proofreading, is that correct? But those are things
That's
that need to
correct.
be done anyway, correct?
They do need to be done when you're complete. But the thing is that when you get through this developmental edit and the structural edit, what's left is your story. And so you won't be moving a lot of words around. You won't be, changing chapters around, scenes around. They're really and truly going to be just now fixing sentences, context, syntax, grammar, punctuation, all that stuff. That kind of stuff is, but you don't want to do that until you've completely gotten your story in order, because otherwise, if you move it all again, then you have to redo it.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
yeah, yeah.
That's very true. So I know a lot of the people, I don't know about on this call here right now, but a lot of the people that are on my mailing list and in my Facebook group, a lot of them are indie published or soon to be indie published, as opposed to the traditional. So I know that if you are going the traditional route, it's probably a good idea to have an editor to begin with, but be aware that your agent is probably going to edit, and then the publisher is probably going to edit. So you'll have multiple edits going the traditional route. If you're going the indie route, an editor is necessary. That's all I can say. I was very fortunate that I went to a writing class and met a woman who said that she'd like to edit my book, and she did, and she was completely done with it before I found out she was a professional editor. I mean, and I have used her ever since. I mean, she just felt that the story was interesting enough. She wanted to edit for me, and never mentioned that she was an editor. So I thought that was kind of funny. So that first one I kind of got a freebie on. But
nice.
Yeah. But the thing is, I know good and well my story was so much stronger from working with her. And that's the one thing I do want to say about editors. I know that as indies, a lot of times they're saying, oh my gosh, do I really want to put that money out? Bite the bullet, put the money out, because it will make you a better writer. Now, I don't get that many edits back from her because I have learned so much from her being my editor. And that's, I think, one of the true values of an editor is what you can learn about being a better author by having your work edited. So do we have some more questions, or go ahead, Deborah?
Well, I was just going to say, I've always said that an edit is actually a one-on-one education. because and it's specifically dealing with your book. So, I mean, I've never had an edit that I didn't just learn so much stuff and I still learn stuff, so it's just wonderful. One chance to make a first impression. That's true. So before you self-publish, you want to make sure that you've got everything right, because she's right. You only have one chance to make a first impression. I
That's
did want
right.
to say, if you're looking for an agent, or, you're going to go the traditional route and you're looking for a publishing house or an agent, the structural edit is absolutely still essential, because that will get you out of the slush pile. Because when they see those first couple of chapters that you've done and everything is in order and your scenes are structured well, everything is structured well, they're going to understand that you knew what you were doing when you put this together, and it will shoot you up a little higher on the totem pole.
That's true. Do we have some more questions? Because I mean, it's not often that we actually get in here and have a professional editor or a professional anybody come in and share their knowledge with us. So we should take advantage of that if we can.
Don't be shy.
I had a question. Do you have any advice about how to find or approach a professional editor if for people who are indie authors? Because I've heard there's a lot of advice out there about how to find agents and query agents,
Right.
but not
Right.
editors.
It is tough. I have found, for a copy edit, I found a lady that was through a Facebook group that's editors. I'm actually on that group now too, that's editors, and you can go in there and it's kind of nice, really, because you can chat with them a little bit on Facebook before they have any kind of information about you. And then at that point, if you decide that you want to go forward and meet them. But I strongly recommend, whoever it is, that you have a one-on-one with them for, at least one time, where you're not even really so much discussing your book as you are discussing how this process will work for you. And just to get a feel for what they do, and if you like them, or, that kind of thing, because that's important.
And what kind of questions do you think a person should ask to find out if you're on the same wavelength with an editor? Because you don't want an editor kind of taking you into left field when you want to go into right field.
Right. Well, one of your very first questions should be, ask them what their genres are. And you don't necessarily want to tell them that your genre is romance, because the first thing they're going to tell you is that they love romance, and of course they can do romance. Find out what their genre is, and then go from there. If they don't do your genre, you don't want that person, because there's different things in different genres that require, like romance especially, has all their little tropes and different things that happen. And if you're not a romance, if you're not tuned in to the romance genre, you're not going to be able to support your client in the way that they need to be supported. So make sure. The other thing that you want to do is, I feel that it's important that they're certified. Then you know that they've gotten some training to do what they want. At this level, you're going to be putting a good fair amount of money out there to get it done. Get somebody who's certified. Ask them how long they've been doing it. Find out what their process is, what their turnaround time is, and that kind of thing. Like I said, with me, I have a turnaround time of about a month, maybe 6 weeks, depending on the length of the book. But I'm in contact with that person during the whole time. And right now I have a guy that I'm working with that just took 6 weeks to do his developmental stuff. He just got back to me about just not even a week ago. And so now we're going to move into the next level. So it's, you know, it can be a long process to get through. And so you want a sense of what to expect.
Very good question.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was wondering if you find a problem and the author then has to go back and rewrite sections of it in the developmental phase, do you go over that and then maybe it needs to be rewritten again, or there needs to be changes? When you discover things that need to be done and they're done, do you have to go over it again? That's what I'm trying to say.
Yes.
I think.
Yes. But the thing is, and Linda can attest to this, is that when you're doing developmental work, your story is already written and we're just going in and we're kind of picking through some of the pieces that aren't quite right. 9 times out of 10, the change that you need to make is something quite small that will have a huge impact. So Linda, out of the whole book, we've got what, 2/3 of the way through the book now. How much do you feel like you have to really and truly rewrite?
Way less than I was thinking.
Hardly
And I will
anything.
say it's a testament to really what a great editor and coach she is. And also to, like, I can edit other people's work all day, but editing my own, it's kind of like, doctor don't, what is it they say about doctors? A doctor who treats himself has a fool for a patient. Kind of that same concept.
It's a lawyer.
Especially if he's a surgeon.
Right?
But I
Yeah.
think what's really great is that, like, she didn't tell me what to do. We would go through something and she'd go, okay, I'm thinking that maybe she's overreacting here. And then I worked in IT for 25 years. And so I'm used to, like, writing user manuals and giving training. And so I tend to overwrite, because when you write user manuals, you go to step A, do this, go to step B, do this. Well, that doesn't translate into fiction very well. And so she's helped me identify some areas where you can say, you know what, you said this already twice in this scene. Let's not repeat ourselves. You don't have to hit the reader over the head with a hammer so that they get it. Give your
Right.
reader some credit for getting it, right? And so my story itself has remained intact. We have cut back a little bit, but I would say I have changed way less than I think I was fearing I would have to change. And I think that, when you get your story idea and then you go off and you write your first draft, you know what you intended. Sometimes that's why when you have that good connection with an editor, they're gonna be on that same wavelength with you and understand what the story is that you're trying to tell. And so then they can pick out the pieces and say, okay, you're like Deborah was able to pick up that my character, like, what happened was her growth was like this and then like this. So I wasn't being gradual enough with her softening her growth. And Deborah just picked up on that in really subtle ways, where all I had to do was just tweak a couple of sentences here and there. And it was like, boom, all of a sudden it just changed the entire complexion of a scene and of a chapter. And so you may be surprised that your story doesn't need as much work as you might think. So
Right.
I think that was really surprising to me.
Celestra has a question, and before she asks that question, before we address that, I want to pick up on something that Linda said, where you mentioned the first draft. Deborah, do you feel a person's ready for an editor after the first draft, or should they be going on and doing a second draft or a third draft before finding an editor?
That depends on their experience. So your first draft ever, first book, first draft, I would say, go back through, take a look at it. Don't look at it for a while, then bring it back out, and then go back through, see what you can come together. When you get to a point that you feel like you just don't know what else to do with it, that's when you really need to start thinking about getting an editor. If you're still looking at it going, well, I could change this. I kind of like how this works. You know, you're kind of still picking away. Then wait till you're settled. But once you get your manuscript to a place where you go, okay, this is it, and I just don't know what else to do with this thing, that's when you need to go look for an editor.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then Celestra says, are traditional publishers looking for something that shows creativity or more of a boilerplate style?
I would say they're looking for creativity, but I don't want to call it boilerplate, but there are like things that are sort of in vogue in the publishing world. For a while, when Harry Potter was coming out, everybody was doing, you know, witches and warlocks and whatever, and then we had all the vampire people, and we, you know, so they do have that. But the trends that are going on, but don't chase a trend. Write your story for what it's worth. Write your story the way you want to write your story. And if you have a good story and you put the energy into it so it reads as a good story, that's what's going to sell your story. It There are so many people that are reading that not everybody wants to read what the trend is. So don't follow the trend. Write what you want to write. I did want to go back just briefly to the lady who asked the question about, do you have to, in the developmental stage, do you have to go back and go over it? That is the answer to that. The straightforward answer to that is yes. So I'm doing that right now with my guy that took 6 weeks. I'm currently going through those changes that he made, but I'm tagging just the changes that he made because I already know the rest of the story. So I'm only looking at those changes. And so, and basically what I'm looking for is, like with his character development, I want to see how often he put that person in. I want to see not only how often, but doing what is he having that person do now? So I'm looking through those kind of things first. The bottom line is, at this point, no matter what he has, we can work with it in the structural part of it now. That part has been addressed enough that now I have something to work with. I'm not just looking at a blank piece of paper with regard to those story structures. And then he had a wonderful object that started out as one thing that held him back. And then he dropped the object. He didn't talk about it anymore. And I discovered at the end of the book that he had to have that object to get what he wanted. And so I said, you know, that object needs to go all the way through because it's a thread in your story from start to finish. So it started out as something that held him back from what he wanted and turned into something that he had to have to get what he wanted. And so I'll be looking at that type of thing. So yes, you have to go back and look at it, but only to make sure that it's even in there, so that when you do the structural edit, that's when you can build it up and make it in its proper place, and let it flow so that it works in your story. Does that answer your question? Yeah, good. And then there was something else. Mini plots. Yeah. Yeah, the objects are like little mini plots. That was a little mini plot he needed to just follow through with. There was something that Linda said. I'm drawing a blank. Linda told me that I helped her fall in love with her story again. So if you're feeling bad about your story, find a good editor. They'll help you fall back in love with your story again. Is there anything? I have to get going. Okay, thank you so much for coming. I appreciate it. Do we have any other questions?
Would you give us your contact information?
Oh, absolutely. Here, let me just, dlmediting.com is my website. And it's just a little landing page. But in there, you can send me an email. It'll come over to me. And then after that, I can actually just be hooked up with you. And there's some freebie stuff in there too, that if you want to take a peek. So yeah.
Okay. Any other questions before we wrap things up? Deborah, I am so thankful that you came and volunteered to speak today.
Oh, great. I hope I was helpful. I mean, this whole thing about editing, it's so confusing what the different edits do. I did want to say in the structural edit, there is a little bit of line editing that can get done. If it's something big, I tend to go ahead and grab it. But just sorting everything out actually in many ways kind of sorts out that part of it too. So that when you do go get those edits, you're so far ahead of yourself by that time that they're not so bad. Those ones are much easier when you're finished.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you so much. My voice is about on the end of its tether at the moment.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Deborah.